Montgomery police detective's ex-boyfriend is now accused of killing her. Police say that Brandon Webster is accused of killing Tanisha Pugsley at her home early yesterday morning. He is facing charges including capital murder and attempted murder. Police found Detective Pugsley's body at a home yesterday. Court records show she was recently granted a restraining order against him, alleging he once hit her while she was holding her godchild, causing her to drop the child.
July 6, 2020. A decorated police detective was found dead inside her own home. But this wasn't the work of a stranger. The man who pulled the trigger was someone she once loved. Tanisha Pugsley wore the badge like a promise. In Montgomery, Alabama, she was the officer who showed up prepared, the colleague who took the tough calls, the mentor who told younger recruits that justice isn't a speech, it's a habit. She studied criminal justice at Alabama State University, then stepped into a life built around service. Her file read detective, but her friends knew the fuller picture. A daughter who checked on her mom, a woman who set goals and hit them, a steady hand in a line of work that can shake even the strongest. When she walked out of roll call, there was a rhythm to her days. Paperwork, interviews, scenes that most people never want to see, and then finally, home, the one place that was supposed to be quiet. This case starts like so many domestic stories that don't make headlines. Tanisha loved, and then she learned that love can turn. At first it was small things, questions that felt more like checks, attention that felt more like surveillance, patience that wore thin around the edges. People who haven't lived it ask, why didn't she just leave? Many do. Many try. Sometimes leaving is the spark that lights a fuse you didn't know was already set. Tanisha did what the system says you should do when fear stops being abstract. She told the truth on paper and asked the court for distance. There was a protective order meant to draw a hard line, this far and no further. But paper only works when a person chooses to respect it. Welcome to Crime Stories Documentaries. If you're here, it means you care about real stories that deserve to be told. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you to give this video a thumbs up. It helps the story reach more people. Share it with someone, because you never know who might need to hear it, who might learn from it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the cases we cover here every day. Together we can build a community that refuses to let these voices be forgotten. On that summer night, the line was not respected, the distance was not honored, and the door that should have stayed closed was breached. Here's where the story takes its first turn, because this wasn't a case of the unknown creeping in from the dark. This was familiarity turned into a weapon. She knew the face. She had shared laughter with it, plans, the small language of two people who once thought they were on the same side. When love flips into control, the rules of danger change. It knows your schedule, your circles, your habits, your most sacred address. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you ignored the first crack, then the second, telling yourself it would pass because it always had? Most of us have bargained with hope at least once. We promise ourselves the next conversation will be calmer, the next boundary will hold, the next day will be better. But on July 6, 2020, hope didn't get a next day. The calm didn't return, and the boundary wasn't a line anymore. It was a memory. What drove a man to turn his gun on the woman who once trusted him most? That's what we're about to uncover. Because this story doesn't end at the tape line. It starts there. It starts with the unanswered calls, the neighbors who heard what they will never unhear, the officers who had to enter a colleague's home and pretend for a few minutes to be made of stone. It starts with a guest who ran to survive and a city that woke up to a headline that felt impossible. And it starts with a truth far too many families know. Danger often wears a familiar face. We will walk through the days and choices that led to that doorframe. We will sit with the red flags that looked small until they weren't. We will ask what help was tried, what help failed, and what help came too late. We'll follow the case into courtrooms and back through the pages of that protective order. And we'll confront a twist that matters more than any legal phrase. The system promised distance, but distance isn't protection if the person determined to hurt you decides the rules don't apply to them. For now, hold on to this picture. A young detective who believed in rules and used them to protect strangers, trusting those same rules to protect her at home. Hold on to the silence that follows violence, the kind of silence that isn't empty, it's heavy. And then hold on to the question that sits at the center of this case and far too many others. When someone signals danger and asks for help, how far should the system go to make sure a locked door stays locked? He opened the door, and what he did inside. We'll come back to that in a moment.
Tanisha's story can't be understood if we only begin at the crime scene. To really feel the weight of her loss, we have to step back to where it all began. She wasn't just a headline or a uniform behind a badge. She was a daughter, a friend, a woman with dreams that stretched further than the walls of her own home. Born and raised with a strong sense of family, Tanisha carried that closeness into everything she touched. Her laughter filled rooms, her determination fueled her education, and her compassion made people trust her with their struggles. She went on to study criminal justice at Alabama State University, a decision that showed exactly where her heart was. While some choose that path for prestige or stability, Tanisha's choice was rooted in something different. She wanted to serve. She wanted to make sure people had someone to call when fear knocked at their door. At ASU, she wasn't just a student. She was a believer in discipline, hard work, and the idea that justice could be more than a word in textbooks. Her professors saw a spark, her peers saw leadership, and her family saw the continuation of values she had been taught since childhood. Fight for what's right, even if it's hard. When she graduated, the badge became her next chapter. She entered the Montgomery Police Department with the seriousness of someone who understood the weight of the oath. Tanisha wasn't in it for power. She was in it for people. On the streets, she became the officer who didn't just enforce laws, she explained them. She was the one who knelt down to talk to a scared child at eye level, who gave a teenager the chance to see options other than the streets, who listened to the elderly when others hurried past. In every corner of Montgomery, you could find someone who had a Tanisha story, maybe small, maybe brief, but always marked by kindness and fairness. Have you ever had a dream so big that you'd stop at nothing to achieve it? That was Tanisha. Being a detective wasn't just a career move, it was a milestone in a promise she made to herself long ago. She was the kind of woman who set goals and wouldn't let go until she reached them. Promotions didn't come easy in her department, but she pushed through the long nights, the tough cases, the emotional drain of seeing too much too soon. And when she pinned on that new rank, she wore it not as a sign of authority, but as a symbol of perseverance. Outside the badge, she was just as impactful. She mentored youth who were at risk of taking the wrong path. She volunteered her time, reminding kids that they were seen and telling them they were worth more than the trouble waiting on the corner. Her life became a bridge for others, between chaos and safety, between doubt and belief, between despair and hope. And that's part of why her death shook Montgomery so deeply, because they didn't just lose an officer, they lost a protector, a role model, a guiding voice. Her story isn't just about tragedy. It's about resilience, justice, and the fight against domestic violence. Tanisha's life shows us what happens when someone dares to believe in a brighter tomorrow. But her story also warns us of the shadows that can creep in, even for those who seem strongest. In her, we see possibility. In her loss, we see the urgency of change. And in the balance between the two, we find the question that lingers. How do we protect the protectors when even they are not safe in their own homes? If you believe that protectors should also be protected, type yes in the comment below.
When people first heard that the man accused of killing Detective Tanisha Plugsley was her ex-boyfriend, Brandon Deshaun Webster, the reaction was disbelief. It was hard to reconcile the image of the uniformed officer, respected and admired, with the idea that behind closed doors she was living in fear of someone she once loved. But that is often the way with domestic violence. It doesn't arrive like a storm all at once. It creeps in like a shadow, starting with warmth, promises, and affection, then slowly tightening until it becomes something dangerous. Brandon Webster was not a stranger to her. In the beginning, their relationship had the same bright edges of any love story. Friends and family recalled how Tanisha smiled around him, how there was laughter, and how the two seemed to share plans for a future. He knew how to say the right things, how to show up in ways that made her feel valued. For a while, he was charming, attentive, and invested. Like many relationships, the cracks didn't appear overnight. They began small, almost invisible, until one day they weren't. The decline was gradual, the way control always is. It started with questions that seemed innocent, the kind you could dismiss as caring. Where are you going? Who are you with? But the questions didn't stop. They grew sharper, more insistent, shifting from curiosity to surveillance. Jealousy seeped into conversations. Texts and calls that once felt affectionate began to feel like checkpoints. What Tanisha may have brushed off in the beginning soon became constant, suffocating. And when control is challenged, it often escalates. Arguments grew tense. Words turned sharp. The man who once appeared to be a partner began to reveal the temperament of someone who couldn't accept distance, couldn't accept no, and couldn't bear the idea of losing control. And here lies the question I want to ask you. What would you do if someone you loved started showing dangerous red flags? Would you walk away the moment you recognized them, no matter how much it hurt? Or would you hope that person might change, that the better version you fell in love with could return? For many victims, the choice isn't simple. Love and fear often sit at the same table. And Tanisha, like so many, wrestled with that tension until she made the decision to step away. By June 2020, she had reached the point where love was no longer enough to outweigh fear. She filed for a restraining order, telling the court what she had already lived, that the man she once trusted was now a threat. The order made it clear Brandon Webster was prohibited from coming near her, prohibited from contact of any kind. On paper, that order was protection. On paper, it was distance. On paper, it was safety. But paper can't stop determination. Paper can't block rage. Paper can't turn a man away if he has already decided that the rules no longer apply to him. And so, the stage was set. Tanisha had done what the system tells victims to do. She spoke up. She asked for help. She put her fear into writing, and the court responded. But Webster didn't respect those lines. He didn't accept the distance. And as July 6th crept closer, he was already making choices that would turn her life into a headline. A protective order is supposed to be a shield. But for Tanisha, it became a reminder of the system's limits. She believed she was safe behind her own locked door. What she didn't know was that the same man she had loved, the man she had trusted, had already crossed that invisible line in his mind long before he crossed her threshold.
July 6th, 2020, Montgomery, Alabama. For most people, it was just another quiet summer evening. But inside Detective Tanisha Pusley's home, there was a fragile attempt at normalcy. She had invited a male friend over, maybe for company, maybe for comfort, or maybe just for a sense of safety in the middle of everything she was enduring. Outside, however, someone else was watching. Brandon Deshaun Webster. He wasn't just driving aimlessly, he wasn't there by accident. He was armed with an AR-style rifle, a weapon chosen not out of fear, but out of intent. Think about that for a second. What does it say about a man's mindset when he chooses a weapon designed for war to confront a woman he once claimed to love? He parked close enough to see the faint glow of lights inside her home, and as he sat there, engine ticking in the Alabama heat, his anger grew darker. He wasn't just angry that she had ended things. He wasn't just angry about the restraining order. No, what he couldn't stand was that she was moving on, living without him. Now here's where the night takes an eerie twist. Neighbors would later recall hearing a car sitting outside far longer than normal. Some even noticed the shadow of a man pacing. It was as if Webster was rehearsing in his mind, going back and forth about what he was about to do. But when jealousy is mixed with obsession, hesitation only lasts so long. He walked toward Tanisha's home, rifle in hand, heart pounding. He pushed through the door, and at that very moment, everything shattered. Tanisha, being a detective, understood danger better than most. She had filed for protection. She had spoken out. She had tried to cut ties. But as so many cases show us, women who leave abusive relationships are often at the highest risk of being harmed. And tragically, Tanisha was no exception. Now back to that night, Webster stepped inside and immediately saw that Tanisha was not alone. Her male friend was there, and for Webster, that was like throwing gasoline on fire. In an instant, the air turned heavy, electric, unpredictable. He demanded answers, his voice booming through the house. Tanisha tried to de-escalate. She had years of training in dealing with conflict. But in this moment, nothing could calm him down. And then came the moment no one expected. Webster raised the rifle. Shots rang out. The first bullet struck Tanisha in the chest. The deafening sound ricocheted through the house, shaking walls and shattering every illusion of safety. Her friend, frozen with fear, had to make a choice: stay and be the next victim, or run and survive. In a split second, he dashed toward the door, hearing Webster's rage-filled shouts behind him. Now here's the twist. As her guest ran for his life, he wasn't sure if Webster was chasing him or still firing at Tanisha. Every step he took, he expected a bullet in his back, and yet somehow he managed to escape into the night, his heart racing, his mind trying to grasp what had just unfolded. But for Tanisha, there was no way out. She was left inside the walls of the very home she thought would shield her. Webster stood over her, the weight of his actions not yet sinking in. To the outside world, this was a crime of passion. But to those who knew Tanisha's story, it was the horrifying conclusion of red flags ignored, of warnings dismissed, of a system that could only protect her on paper. And when the gunfire stopped, silence followed, a silence that was louder than any scream. Neighbors would later recall hearing not just the shots, but also the sudden quiet that came after. That quiet wasn't peace. It was the sound of a life stolen, of dreams destroyed, of a community about to be shaken to its core. And perhaps the most annoying twist of all, just hours earlier, Tanisha had spoken to friends about looking forward to her future, about rebuilding, about moving on. She had no idea that the very man she was trying to escape from was preparing to ensure she'd never see that future.
The first calls came just minutes after the gunfire. Neighbors reported hearing the terrifying bursts of rifle shots, followed by screams, and then silence. When police arrived at Tanisha's home, the sight that met them would forever haunt her colleagues. Inside lay Detective Tanisha Pugsley, not in her uniform, not in the role of protector, but as victim, a fellow officer, one of their own. For men and women who had worked alongside her in the Montgomery Police Department, this was not just another crime scene. This was family. The yellow crime scene tape that they stretched around her home didn't just mark off evidence, it marked the shattering of trust, hope, and community. Word spread fast. Within hours, colleagues, friends, and neighbors began gathering. Some stood in disbelief. Others broke down in tears. Tanisha wasn't just a detective. She was a mentor, a big sister figure, someone who worked tirelessly to guide young people away from violence. Now her life had ended in the very violence she dedicated her career to stopping. Her mother, Sharon, would later speak of the pain no parent should ever endure. A mother who had raised her daughter to chase her dreams, to fight for justice, to rise against the odds, now forced to plan a funeral instead of celebrating milestones. Her words carried the weight of grief that no amount of time could ever erase. And here's where we stop and ask, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Imagine opening your heart, believing in someone, sharing your dreams, only for that person to become the one who destroys it all. For Tanisha, the man she once loved, the man she once trusted, became her killer. That betrayal is what cuts the deepest. So here's the question I want to ask you. Do you think the system failed her? Should more be done to protect victims when restraining orders are violated? Some argue that if she, a police detective, couldn't be protected, what hope does the average woman have? Others believe there's only so much law enforcement can do when someone is determined to cross the line. The controversy grew louder as the community demanded answers. How could this have been prevented? Could Webster have been stopped earlier? Should stricter monitoring be enforced once restraining orders are filed? These debates weren't just legal, they were deeply personal. For every person mourning Tanisha, it felt like a call to action, a cry for change. Tanisha's story became more than just another crime statistic. It became a symbol of how domestic violence does not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're a mother, a daughter, a police detective, or a community leader. It can touch anyone. And the tragedy is that it often ends in silence, behind closed doors, until it's too late.
In the days after Tanisha's death, investigators worked quickly to piece the story together. They didn't have to look far for the suspect. All the signs, all the warnings, all the red flags pointed to one man, Brandon Deshaun Webster. He was arrested and charged with capital murder for taking Tanisha's life and attempted assault for endangering her guest, who narrowly escaped the gunfire that night. In that moment, the community felt a strange mix of relief and fury. Relief because he would finally face justice. Fury because nothing, no arrest, no charge, no sentence, could undo the damage he had already done. For years, Tanisha's family waited for the wheels of justice to turn. Each court date was another painful reminder of what had been stolen from them. Her colleagues filled the courtroom benches, a sea of blue uniforms, silent but unyielding, determined to make sure her name was not forgotten. And then came 2023, the trial that would decide Webster's fate. The prosecution laid out every detail. They showed how his obsession had escalated.
They presented the restraining order she filed only weeks before her murder. They showed the AR-style rifle he carried into her home. They painted a clear picture. This was not a crime of passion, not a moment of temporary loss of control. This was premeditated, calculated, and merciless. The defense tried to cast doubt, to soften the edges of his rage, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw through it. After deliberation, the verdict was read: guilty. The judge's sentence was final: life without parole. Webster would never walk free again. For some, it was justice. For others, it was a hollow victory. Because here's the haunting question: was justice truly served, or was it far too late? The court gave him life, but Tanisha had hers stolen. No sentence could ever bring her back. No punishment could erase the fear in her last moments or heal the hole left in the hearts of her family and community.
Though the trial ended, Tanisha's story did not. Her family, her colleagues, and her community refused to let her name fade into another headline. Her mother, Sharon, turned unimaginable pain into purpose. She founded a nonprofit called Tookie's Voice, named after Tanisha's childhood nickname. The mission was clear: to support survivors of domestic violence, to give them resources Tanisha herself never had, and to ensure no one else had to walk alone in silence. Through Tookie's Voice, Sharon partnered with the Family Justice Center to create a project called Go Backs. These are emergency kits filled with essentials, clothing, toiletries, items survivors can grab when they flee dangerous situations. Because the reality is, when someone decides to leave an abusive partner, they often leave with nothing but the clothes on their back. For them, a go bag can mean survival. This became Tanisha's legacy. Her life, her dreams, her tragic death transformed into a lifeline for others. Every go bag handed out carries not only supplies, but also her story, her name, her fight. And that's where I want to speak directly to you. This channel isn't more than just stories. It's awareness, it's justice, it's giving a voice to those who can no longer speak. Every time we tell a story like Tanisha's, we are fighting back against the silence that surrounds domestic violence. We are reminding the world that behind every statistic is a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend. So here's the final truth. Tanisha's story is a reminder: domestic violence doesn't just happen to strangers. It can happen to anyone. It happened to a decorated detective. It happened to a woman who was loved, admired, and respected. And if it could happen to her, it can happen to someone other. We can make sure Tanisha's voice lives on, not just as a tragedy, but as a call for change.